there's a number of things that I'm willing to have conversations about and figure out. But I think that it's just something coming to this committee is perceived as anti-gun, and I've never filed an anti-gun piece of legislation in my life.
It's State Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer at the Illinois House Gun Violence Prevention Committee, and here we are with Illinois in Focus Daily. So new committee started. We've talked about it several times already because they've had several meetings, but it's, of course, a new General Assembly this year, and that means you've got the new creation of certain committees, one being the Illinois House Committee on Gun Violence Prevention. So what they're doing is they've been hearing substantive issues on bills about, prohibiting somebody with a misdemeanor conviction of stalking in another state from being able to get a FOID card in Illinois. They've talked about, a variety of other measures, and there's bills in committee that we haven't heard yet about safe storage. You've got another measure that would increase the firearm transfer fee to help fund police to go and confiscate expired or revoked FOID cards and firearms that may be associated with those FOID cards, firearm owner ID cards. So we've already heard a lot, right? Well, yesterday they actually met and they took action on a bill that we already touched on as well about the E-Trace program. This is essentially a program the federal government has to help law enforcement track certain firearms that may be used in crimes or that may be stolen and such. So they wanted to increase the ability of law enforcement to have those communications. Here's Curtis Tarver, Democrat from Chicago, who talked about how he's amending the bill and hopes to get it passed onto the House floor.
I'm sure you've had a chance to review this amendment. It's not very long. It just clarifies a couple of things that we discussed last time. One is gender neutral language. Another is just ensuring that IDNR is not looped into being tasked to essentially verify firearms in state parks. Based on what we discussed before, this is more of a law enforcement data sharing bill than it is an IDNR gotcha bill. So we've had some pretty robust discussion about it. I do want to say for the record, I've had a chance to have some conversations again and just want to reiterate, this is not a bill about impinging on the Second Amendment at all. This is a data sharing bill. I'm happy to have that conversation on the floor to make sure it's in the legislative record.
So the legislative record is very important because a lot of times if a law is challenged in courts, then the courts will go and look at transcripts of committees and even of House floor debate to look at what the legislative intent is to make that clear. So this measure passed, and it was the first measure to pass out of the Gun Violence Prevention Committee. And here is Maura Hirschauer, the committee chair, celebrating that.
On a vote of 9 in favor and 4 opposed, House Bill 1373 is declared passed and will be favorably reported to the House floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Okay, that was exciting. Our first bill out of committee. Good job, everyone. Yay!
So the Gun Violence Prevention Committee getting their first bill out of committee, and we'll hear that on the House floor clearly, but they've got a whole bunch of other bills they're going to be possibly passing out of committee. But yesterday they had a subject matter hearing also on a Republican measure. C.D. Davidsmeyer, hearing a lot from him lately, but of course he's pretty active in the General Assembly as a Republican from Murrayville. But he had a measure that he said stems from a story of a kid who is being bullied, and after school, the bully followed the kid and said, "I'm going to get a gun and shoot you." And apparently it was observed by a librarian at the school, and they didn't report that to the principal until the next morning. And the bill that Davidsmeyer says is kind of like a mandatory reporting type thing. If somebody in a school setting hears that type of bullying, then there needs to be some follow-up immediately with messages directly to the principal and also to the parents of these kids who are in the middle of a spat where somebody may threaten somebody else with a firearm, even just saying, "I'm going to go get my gun from home and shoot you." So Davidsmeyer again sets up why he thinks it's important to have some kind of communication thereafter immediately to stem off any bad outcomes.
The idea behind this bill, and I'm not married to the idea of this bill, but it was just a quick thought process. What can we do to prevent this on the front end, right? So if something like that happens, number one, I think we can all agree that the teacher needs to immediately report it up the line, right, to the principal. Once that happens, the parents must be notified on both sides. And then, my thought was, and this is the area where I don't know that we need to be specific, but do we bring in law enforcement at this time and say, all right, we're going to contact the parents of the kid who made the threat and ensure that that child does not have access to a firearm, right? And that could be as simple as, a phone call to the parent and saying, is it available? Could this have happened? I don't want to take any threats lightly. And I think I would hope that all legal gun owners would be in the same boat and say, you know what, if this happens, if we can make sure these horrible incidents no longer happen, our gun rights will not be under attack.
Yeah, it's an interesting proposal there. You would think it would be kind of common sense, but I mean, what was it down in Georgia? It was a recent school shooting, and I'm just now remembering this. Some guy takes a gun to school and shoots up the school. A couple of people were killed. It wasn't that long ago, like 6 or 7 months ago. And they actually did have the parents notified beforehand that there were, questions of like red flags and this child having access to guns. And they even went to the house. If you recall, it was either Georgia or Tennessee. I'm pretty sure it was Georgia. Regardless, that didn't necessarily stop what happened from happening, right? So, I mean, even with something like this in place, you're still probably going to have things like that. But what about getting police involved? Davidsmeyer says, it's worth a conversation and what kind of level of involvement they would have.
The only thing that I could see as being possibly viewed in that way would be getting law enforcement involved and going to somebody's house and making sure. I wasn't saying law enforcement physically has to go into somebody's house and make sure that their gun is properly stored. They have to have that conversation. Right? So having a conversation is not a bad thing, and maybe law enforcement doesn't necessarily have to be involved. But I just want to make sure that there is follow-up with the parents in that direction. I mean, I understand. I have concerns about the laws that say no cell phones in schools because
and he goes on from there to talk about how he's willing to have more conversations about the level of communication. In the live chat, Warsaw says it was Georgia. I think he remembers that story as well. But then Jeremy says, secure our schools like you do banks and protection like these politicians have. So maybe that's something else. I don't know. If you do get a report of a bully saying, hey, I'm going to go and get a gun and shoot up whatever, then maybe immediately report that to obviously law enforcement, parents and principals and whatnot. But maybe have a little bit tighter security prompted at the schools. Maybe that's something that Jeremy's putting out there as a suggestion. Regardless, Davidsmeyer says again he's willing to have conversations about all of this.
There's a number of things that I'm willing to have conversations about and figure out. But I think that it's just something coming to this committee is perceived as anti-gun, and I've never filed an anti-gun piece of legislation in my life.
So Davidsmeyer obviously has also filed, I believe, bills in the past to get rid of the FOID card. But this being the Gun Violence Prevention Committee, Davidsmeyer being in the minority Republican Party, getting a bill heard, that's interesting. Hirschauer, again, the chair, Democrat from Batavia, saying that it's important to have these conversations.
Common sense gun violence prevention takes work and input from lawful gun owners as well. So thank you for bringing this bill forward so we can bring that message out because that's really important to me as the committee chair.
And Davidsmeyer went on to finish his conversation. I'm sorry, I just saw something in the live chat. Sometimes I shouldn't look at the live chat. Other times, I get feedback from you guys. Sorry. All right, live to tape. Get the live show here each and every weekday morning and join the live chat as well. But Davidsmeyer closing out. He says, listen. As you said earlier, this isn't a Second Amendment infringement idea. This is something he's willing to have conversations about, and it's not anti-gun or anything like that.
And once again, for anybody out there that's paying attention to this bill, I want to make sure they understand that I'm not sending law enforcement to their house because of a statement that was made. I want to make sure that we head it off with the proper communication. Whether law enforcement needs to be involved or does not need to be involved, we can make those decisions in the policy in the future.
So David's Meyer bill, it was just subject matter. We could hear some different proposals to amend it or different ideas about reporting this type of level of bullying, especially if there's a gun that's being threatened to be used. So here we are on the ground at the state capitol. I got to get out of here right now and go cover what's going on today because they're in session. So be back tomorrow. We'll see what happens, right? It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Wake up with us each and every weekday morning. Get the podcast where you get podcasts and get the newsletter in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. Again, thecentersquare.com.